Okay, it's 2 o'clock and we have, I want to have a lot of time for our discussion today. So welcome everyone to Technoscience Thursdays at 2 webinar series. My name is Julie Hinderer, and I'm the Science Programs Manager at the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. So this is the fifth of 6 initially planned webinars as kind of a pilot series. Based on feedback we've been getting, I think we'll probably continue this in some form or another into the future. And make sure you check out the webinar series webpage there on that QR code, or Ted is dropping a bunch of links in the chat for you to check out. So you can find all the recordings of the previous webinars on that page. You can find info on upcoming webinars. And I have not posted the information on our next webinar yet because we're still kind of finalizing some things. But I'm excited to be able to announce that and share the registration link today. So it's going to be on July 31st. It's a Thursday at 2 p.m. And we're going to be featuring Dr. Will Atlas and some of his First Nations collaborators, William Housty and Spencer Greening, and they're going to talk about their project Salmon Vision, which combines indigenous tech with artificial intelligence to monitor salmon populations in the Pacific Northwest. So Ted should be dropping the link in the chat there to sign up, register for that webinar. And then finally, there'll be also a link for our listserv. If you want to sign up for that, get your email on the list, then we can make sure that you don't miss any future announcements. So really quickly, some Zoom tips. Please mute your audio when you're not speaking. And if you would like to ask a question of the panel, you can do that in several ways. You can use the chat feature and drop your questions there. We will be monitoring the chat. And as well, you can, under the React button on the bottom taskbar, you can click on that and raise your hand, and then we can call on you to ask your question verbally. So that's my little spiel. And there's things come, okay. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker. Just pulling up my notes on your titles, Steve. So Dr. Steve Cooke is a professor of fish ecology and conservation physiology and a Canada research professor in the Department of Biology and Institute of Environmental and Interdisciplinary Science at Carleton University. So take it away, Steve. We saw your slides and now they're gone.
Yeah, unmute before I did that. Okay, now share screen. Okay, there we go. Looking good, Julie?
Yep, I can see your slides. You just, yep, gotta start the slideshow.
Okay. Can you see me moving on to a next slide?
Nope.
Nope.
We're still seeing the development page, not the show.
Yep.
What about now?
Nope.
Still the same one.
Stop share. I'm gonna do it again as a full screen. Share screen, entire screen. Share.
Inception.
Okay, what about now?
That looks great.
Okay. All right. Sorry, folks. Let's get rolling here. A couple things. So in addition to being a professor, I'm also an avid multi-species angler. I spend a lot of time in the water and a lot of time thinking about recreational fishery science management and, of course, how to catch more and bigger fish. This one's a little bit different, this presentation, relative to the other Technoscience webinars. The spirit of this is really to make sure that managers have a little bit of insight on the latest and greatest technology that's coming at them in an effort to embrace that and harness it to allow them to do their jobs better. So we've covered things like eDNA, for example, and telemetry. This one's a little bit different. This is technology that certainly has the potential to be of use to researchers and stock assessment biologists, but this one's a little bit different, where there's been some issues generated with this new technology that managers are needing to confront. And so that's sort of the premise for today. So this is a primer in terms of resources. If you're interested in just thinking in reading a bit more broadly about how technological innovations are arising in the recreational fisheries sector and what that means for fisheries management policy, that top QR code will take you to a paper that's pretty broad. And then more recently, we synthesized the available information on live sonar, and you don't need to pay to get those. That takes you directly to the papers, and you can scan those later on, or we'll throw the links in the chat. So let's start off with what is live sonar, and I'm intentionally using the term live sonar as a bit broader of a term than what you might hear with forward-facing sonar or FFS. Some folks call it live imaging, or they use the proprietary names associated with the different products. So there's three main products that are available in the commercial market to the rec fishing folks: the Garmin LiveScope, the Lowrance Active Target, and the Humminbird Mega Live Imaging. So sometimes you'll see people just say, hey, I'm using LiveScope tech. All of these things are more or less the same, and they provide a real-time continuous display of that underwater environment. What's different here, because there have been fish finders on the market for many, many years. What's different here is that it allows you to see things move. So for example, as fish move through the water column, or your lure or bait moves through the water column, you're actually able to see it. You can also scan well ahead of the boat and actually use this gear to zero in on where that fish is. So I see a fish, it's at 6 feet depth, it's 23 feet off the bow, and I need to cast in that direction. So it really allows one to target the fish. It's often used alongside other sonar, including things like side scan, down imaging, and 360 imaging. So when you see the front of a boat, this is the front of I'll say a typical professional bass boat these days, you'll see multiple screens. Each one's doing something a little bit different. Typically, it's that big screen that's for the forward-facing sonar. That long handle you see off that device that's positioned in front of the trolling motor, that allows the individual operating the live sonar to sort of pan it back and forth, independent of the trolling motor. Oftentimes, some of the previous tech, the sonar transducers would actually be mounted on the actual trolling motor. This allows you to sort of see where the fish are and perhaps come at them, maybe try and flank them. So that's what the front of a modern bass boat looks like. This is what one sees, and just for fun, I threw a picture in the bottom right there. If you want, you can connect this stuff and actually look at it through various glasses that provide you that sort of real-time virtual experience. But this is what it looks like if you're looking down at that screen. So across the top is the distance from where the sonar unit is. You can see at 0 there. Across the top axis there, that's where the sonar sort of is sending out its signal from, where you are essentially standing as an angler. And then you've got water depth there, and you can see fish, you can see cover. But what's important is, again, you can see the fish moving, you can cast, and you can ensure that your lure or bait is positioned right near where those fish are. So definitely a game changer. So what are people saying? Here's some quotes that have been pulled from the interweb. If you're not scoping, you're hoping. With real-time visuals, anglers can now pinpoint the exact whereabouts of fish. There's a comment here about tournament fishing, the need to strike a balance between traditional practices and emerging tech. FFS threatens the integrity of what true fishing is. And then, of course, thinking about from a management perspective, the argument in this case isn't if we should have the tech, but rather how we manage the fishery because of it. So as you can see here, there's a variety of perspectives. And if you go online, this is look at Facebook sites, if you look at various discussion forums, fishing magazines, this is the talk of the day. Everybody is talking about live sonar and what it means for fishing, what it means for the industry, and what it means for the future of fisheries management. So most of the folks online here are going to be in the science or management space, but I do know there's some folks from fishing clubs and lake associations and as well on the call here. But in short, the evidence base is extremely small. The screenshot of empirical studies that I have on the screen there, that basically is the lion's share of the research that's been published on this topic. There are a handful of others that touch on this. There's certainly a lot of work that's in progress. There's some government tech reports. But the point is there's not a lot out there. So that earlier on, my second slide, I showed you an image of a paper that we published synthesizing a lot of perspectives on these things. I just want to note that it's very much informed by reading fishing magazine articles, talking to fisheries managers, looking at where things are being discussed in the community. I'm not able to present you a rigorous, strictly science-based, with robust underpinnings here. This is just an overview, and I'm intentionally leaning on anecdotes because that's, for the most part, what we have. This is a conceptual diagram when we start to think about what live sonar provides relative to when not using it. So we would predict that catch rates would be improved. That's what is sort of promised essentially by this technology. We would assume that catch composition could change. It could change in different ways. It could allow us to target certain species more effectively, potentially reducing bycatch. So there's things here that could be for good or for bad. And then there's the potential to really increase individual catchability. So, hey, I'm going after really the big ones or female fish or fish on the bottom, whatever it happens to be. And so that's certainly a possibility. And so collectively, various combinations of those things could lead to potential for increased fishing mortality. That could be from harvest, or it could be from release mortality. And depending on the characteristics of the fishery and the population, that could lead to population declines. It could lead to changes in population community structure, as well as the potential for evolutionary impacts via artificial selection if we are selectively removing individuals with certain characteristics. For example, the biggest fish. So what does the science say? So I'll proceed through those three key things that I just showed you in that conceptual diagram. So first, in terms of changes in catch rates, and as noted, the assumption is that this should increase angler efficiency and presumably fish harvest, at least for harvest-oriented anglers. But the reality is that the results are really quite mixed. You'll note here I'm not providing any references. All the references to these statements are within the paper that I provided earlier, and I showed you the screenshots for most of them already. And some of this work was in the works, and hopefully inching closer to being able to be shared as full papers. Take home here is that we see evidence of improved catch rates in one instance for crappie. In another crappie and blue catfish example, no difference in catch rates between individuals that are using live sonar and not. And then no clear pattern for several different species in Minnesota. Interestingly, we see improved catch rates for paddlefish in Oklahoma, but that's only for fishing guides. And I'll remind you that fishing guides are experts. They spend most days on the water, and they've really taken the time to really learn how to use this. So some of the things that we might infer from this limited evidence base is that live sonar may not be universally advantageous to all anglers because it really requires a lot of time to learn how it works. Most of these data come from creel surveys. There's really very little experimental research. We aren't going out and randomly giving one angler a live sonar in the front of their boat and another one not. And along that lines, even if we did so, we'd have to train them on how to use it before it would actually be useful. So there's room for more experimental research here. It's just not easy to do. And certainly need to think about how things play out versus the avid angler and expert versus the average angler. Certainly as this becomes more accessible, we may expect some of those new users to become more skilled. So lots of questions in that space. Next, changes in catch composition. We know that live sonar allows anglers to identify and target certain species and sizes of fish. You can't really tell a smallmouth apart from a largemouth, but you can certainly pick out things like a sturgeon or a paddlefish or a large muskie, and do so with relative ease. This, of course, has the potential for selective harvest. Conversely, as I mentioned before, if anglers can really, I'm after this type of fish, you can really target that specific species and sizes, which for those individuals might lead to greater satisfaction, reduced bycatch, and potentially reduced impacts to those non-target individuals or species. We've got evidence where live sonar yielded no increase in size of crappies that were caught and harvested in Kansas or Oklahoma. And there's some nuance to that, but I'll just simplify in that way for now. The guided anglers in Oklahoma using live sonar caught and kept larger and older, as well as more female paddlefish than unassisted snag anglers. This is using snagging. That's the primary approach for catching paddlefish. And then another example where anglers in Australia were targeting catching larger Murray cod using that technology, but certainly more research is needed. And then lastly, in terms of individual catchability, anglers can selectively target which fish to catch. And we're starting to see that play out. For example, in Texas, there's been some concern around black bass being targeted in the winter in deep water where barotrauma is common. And these were fish that are previously somewhat difficult to find. It could also be used to repeatedly cast, follow, and essentially harass some of the trophy fish. So again, think about things like muskie, and I'll come back to that as an example later on. And we know that big fish are important for reproduction. That could also lead to the repeat capture of trophy-sized individuals, and that's been observed for paddlefish in Oklahoma. It could also allow anglers to maintain catch rates even when populations are low, masking decline. So there may in fact be a population that's doing poorly, but the forward-facing sonar is given the illusion that there's still fish to be caught because we're accessing fish that were previously invisible or uncatchable. And then finally, selective removal or mortality of fish being targeted in this way could represent a unique part of the population. And if we saw mortality there, we could see artificial selection. So what have we seen management agencies do? So here's a Wired to Fish article with a title. This is importantly from April 2023. It says 12 states to ban use of live scope on state fisheries. This has not happened, but these were things that were certainly being discussed a couple years ago. Wisconsin had, and I don't fully understand your political system, but there was something brought forward at the state level which required debate and even a vote. I think this was the State Natural Resource Board, and those individuals that participated in that vote deemed 36 were in favor of banning this live sonar technology, whereas 33% did not. To my knowledge, this did not move forward into any formal regulations, but just sharing with you the kind of thing that's happening. I'm aware of at this point, and I'm sure there's other folks on this call here that are frontline workers in the management space and may have other examples, but I'm aware of a single example right now where there's a state or provincial regulation. That's in Montana, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks. It's new to 2025 and it's specific to paddlefish. And you can read there at the bottom, forward-facing sonar, and it lists the different kinds, is illegal in the state of Montana to aid in snagging paddlefish. Other types of sonar are allowed. So you can go fishing for cutties, you can go fishing for smallmouth bass, you can go fishing for whatever you want, except using this technology to target paddlefish when snagging. We're also starting to see some really interesting, what I'll call a bottom-up response. So a couple months ago, folks from Eagle Lake in Northern Ontario reached out to me, and they were asking about what regulations were being enacted, and if I thought it would be at all in the realm of possibility to get a reg on the books. And I suggested that it would probably be quite difficult, being that the evidence base is quite thin. And they were creative and came up with another approach. And so this is voluntary. You can see the wording there. We strongly urge you, But this was embraced by a whole bunch of the lodges on that lake, and those lodges account for a huge chunk of the fishing effort and pressure. And there's lots of lodges that enact their own rules, whether they be barbless hook rules or other things. So this was with respect to protecting muskellunge. They didn't want people to sharpshoot those fish in deep water, stress, barotrauma issues. Also not road hunting, using the gas motor to find them while scanning, and then just respecting those depth limits. Again, not fishing too deep. So here's an interesting bottom-up approach, the first that I'm aware of, and this has gone as viral as fishy things go. This has gone viral. I think they had 300,000 hits, if you will, or impressions as of a couple days ago. So really making waves. There are some tournament issues. We've got Gene Gilliland from B.A.S.S on the call here that can talk about this a lot more. Diverse responses within the different tournament organizations. But I'll suggest that most of this really is not about fisheries concerns. These changes aren't being brought about because there's concern that the bass tournaments are wiping out bass populations. This is about just different perspectives within that community around fairness and just, I preferred things the way they used to be. There's some, the nonprofit Touring Anglers Association has pledged to take bass fishing back to the grassroots. They prohibited usage of live sonar in at least some of their events, but we've seen a variety of responses. Limiting the number of type of transducers, limiting screen size to X square inches, kind of in the same way that how we measure television inches. Partial restrictions for multi-day tournaments. So in other words, you can only use live sonar on one of 2 days of a 2-day tournament. And then also thinking about planning tournaments whereby you spend some time on shallower, maybe swampier waters, where this kind of technology isn't going to be as helpful because you're just in the thick slop and the weeds get in the way effectively. So anyways, these are some of the things being discussed. In terms of other musings, there's some thought that people are going to spend more time looking for the optimum fish and fishing spots rather than actively fishing, which might reduce their overall satisfaction. I go fishing to relax and spend time with family and to try and get away from my screen. So everybody fishes for different reasons. There's also issues around this technology with respect to access to resources. This is not cheap. We already have disparities between boat anglers and shore anglers. Shore anglers aren't going to be using this technology, and even most boat anglers aren't going to be able to afford it. So we're talking about a technology that's really being limited to professional anglers or the upper couple percent in both avidity and in terms of wealth. And then, of course, what is fair? That's a societal decision. That's not a fisheries management decision. A really cool article from 1985 to check out there if you want to read more. Obviously, this technology was not on the market when this was discussed. On the left are some of the issues I've talked about. On the right, there are some opportunities when we think about recruitment and retention, the next generation of anglers. Most kids are tech addicted, and maybe this is one way to get them connected to fishing with that hybrid of technology and outdoor time. Potential for targeting individual fish for selective removal when we think about invasive species programs. We could use it to study fish behavior and fate upon release for catch and release studies, improve our fisheries and habitat assessment work, as well as for locating lost equipment. So lots of options there in terms of opportunities. To wrap things up, really decisions around use of live sonar really need to be informed by science, but also by taking time to listen and engage with stakeholders, rights holders, the industry, and society more broadly. Efforts to simply ban the technology, I don't think are merited by any means at this point in time in a broad sense. I think we need to be much more targeted and nuanced, and certainly need to do much more work. There's also the argument that, that we don't need to ban the technology, but instead we need to think differently about how we manage fisheries. If people are interacting with fish differently and potentially harvesting differently, then what do we need to do with our other management levers to address that? There are a few examples of how we've regulated technology in the past. It usually revolves around gear, hook types, bait, things like that. But in general, we tend to, as a community, not regulate technology like GPS, sonar, and so on. We need to proceed slowly and conduct management scale experiments where we have perhaps some water bodies that are live scope free compared to others that allow it, and doing really good research and monitoring to determine whether or not there's any differences that arise from that type of treatment. I want to just end with, we've got one more slide after this, just remind you that whenever we talk about technology, let's start at the top there. There's innovators. So those are the folks that come up with this stuff. You've got the early adopters, which is probably where we were 3 or 4 years ago. Then you've got the early majority. We're probably somewhere between the early adopters and the early majority. But if you think about that distribution as being all anglers, the reality is that most anglers are never going to be able to engage with this technology because they can't afford boats, they can't afford this type of technology. So yes, we have early adopters, but I'd say this is pretty well embraced by those that are spending a lot of time on the water. So I'm not exactly sure where to pinpoint us, where we are on that innovation adoption life cycle. In terms of being proactive, right now, that's kind of where we're at. We are thinking about this. The third fish over there, consider science, if any available on the topic. That's kind of what we're doing. Today is very much about that. And do we need to propose regs? Do we need to do some education? Really unclear. Reactive policy development is waiting for things to go sideways. So that would be waiting to see, for example, meaningful declines in populations of paddlefish before acting. And we saw a proactive approach from the folks in Montana, as opposed to waiting for a population crash, which would be a reactive approach. So these are things that we can think about. I would still think we're kind of on the front end there. And we want to keep it that way. We never want to be reactive if we don't have to be. We want to be ahead of the curve. Last thing I'll leave with you, my biggest concern, that live sonar has eliminated what I call the insurance policy that used to exist in our wreck fisheries. There were fish that we could not find, and now there's simply nowhere to hide. Those fish were out there, and it's possible that somebody might have stumbled upon, that pack of cruising smallmouth in the middle of the lake, but relatively unlikely. And those were the fish that were there when we get the easy to catch ones. That's the insurance policy, that reproductive potential when we fish down the easy to catch fish. So that insurance policy is now gone. And I think that's probably my single biggest concern that I'll leave you with. So I'll stop my share. I'll thank you for your attention. And I will thank all of the folks that are working in this space for their willingness to share. We've definitely got a community of practice where folks are willing to really share with everybody what they've learned along the way. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. So Steve is going to be sort of part of our panel, but I did want to take just maybe 1 or 2 specific questions for Steve while they're fresh in your mind. And I do see one in the chat, Steve. Are live sonar visual outputs sensitive enough to pick up nest guarding fish, crappie, bass, especially in turbid water?
Yes, definitely. Again, it requires some skill to do that. And certainly, where this technology really excels is, finding fish in the middle of nowhere. That's where, I've been really impressed. But yes, you can see what's hiding under docks. You could see a fish on a nest going in circles. And turbidity is not a problem for this technology.
Okay, and what is the big difference going from side/down imaging to live scope as far as revealing the unfindable fish, in your opinion?
Yeah, great point. A lot of the side down imaging has been really a game changer in terms of helping us to map the habitat. Really, really good at showing the habitat. less so at the fish, not brutal, but less so. I think it really is telling us about the behavior of fish. So not that, hey, I spotted some fish, what direction are they going? How are they, when I cast, how are they interacting with the lure? So there's that findable part, but also catchable. And I realize finding a fish does not make it catchable necessarily, but that is a prerequisite. You have to have a lure or bait near a fish to catch it. That is, and this certainly improves the odds of doing so.
I would say finding a fish does not make it catchable is especially applicable to me personally.
I hear you.
Any other quick questions for Steve?
I'll continue to monitor the chat there and answer any other questions folks want to put in there.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, so as Steve mentioned, our goal with these webinars is to provide information for fishery managers and practitioners on cutting edge technology, but we don't want this to be a one-way push of info, but rather a dialogue. So in that spirit, I'm really grateful to have a panel of practitioners joining us today. And so just briefly for everyone's benefit on how the rest of the webinar will go, I'll call on each of our panelists in turn to have them introduce themselves at first. And then I have some sort of pre-populated questions for the panel, but then we'll have hopefully at least 10 minutes at the end, if not a little bit more, for audience questions and open discussion for our panel. And I'm hoping to have a few minutes at the end to stop the recording if there's anyone who would like to ask questions, but sort of prevented from doing so by their agency policies on recording. So with no further ado, I'll call on each of the panelists. And if you can just take kind of no more than 5 minutes now to introduce yourselves. What do you do? How have you interacted broadly with this technology in your work? Things you might want to touch on, maybe, what changes have occurred in your field, in your work in response to this technology. And in the spirit of Steve's slide, is your agency taking any proactive steps in response, or has this kind of been more of a reactive thing? So I'll start with the first one I see on my screen, which is Gene.
Thank you. My name is Gene Gilliland. I am the Conservation Director for B.A.S.S, the Bass Angler Sportsman Society. And in a previous life, I was a fishery research biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation for 30 plus years. Our company, B.A.S.S, has been working with the live sonar issue for the past several years. Among the other 2 or 3 major bass tournament organizations, each one of them has taken a little different approach on how they're working with the live sonar. As Dr. Cooke mentioned in his earlier remarks, some of the tournament organizations have banned it. Some of them have come up with some hybrid product where certain days or periods the live sonar is not available for use, and others parts of the day it is. In the case of our company, we regulated the amount of restricting the number of transducers and the number of inches of screen that the anglers can use. And I will say that we are probably going to have some additional changes for next season for 2026, based on input from our anglers. And the thing to remember with each of these professional organizations is that we put on tournaments, but we are primarily media organizations, and we are looking for viewers and fans, whether it's on live television, whether it's live stream on the internet, or fans that come to our events. And so not only do we have to work with our anglers and make sure that we're doing what keeps them happy, but we also have to work with our fans and our viewers to make sure viewership stays up, because that relates directly to sponsorship. And all 3 of the major electronics companies are major sponsors of all of the tournament organizations. So that's something we got to juggle a number of different things here to make sure that we're providing the product that everybody likes, but also trying to level the playing field. As Dr. Cooke also mentioned, in the bass fishing world, the interest is high. It's very divided in terms of people that like the live sonar and those that don't. But it's also a very dynamic, changing situation as younger and younger anglers come into the tournament world, and they've grown up with technology. The questions we ask today, we will get completely different answers in 5 to 10 years when we poll anglers about whether they like the technology or want to embrace it or not. So that's something we've got to work on, is where do we go in the future?
Thanks very much, Gene. Jerry?
Hey, I'm Jerry Brown. I'm the Chief of Fisheries for the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. And so our fisheries biologists in the field began looking at forward-facing sonar, live imaging, whatever we call it, back in 2018. So it wasn't too long after the technology came out and started to get used, but that was primarily looking at what we call our flood control reservoirs that are very popular, primarily for crappie fishing. And they have repeated a study that was done probably 10 to 15 years ago, where they were looking at single pole anglers versus multi-pole anglers for crappie fishing or spider rigging. And so they just added the question, are you using forward-facing sonar to that? And like I said, repeated that 3-year study on those reservoirs. And so that data was used to kind of gain information. And we made some regulation changes last year. And higher catch rates were certainly part of that. It wasn't strictly changed because of the sonar, but it was one of the criteria there that we used for the justification was a higher catch rate. So anyway, we haven't made any major changes to how we do things, other than a lot of our other biologists statewide have started asking those questions, especially on larger bodies of water and popular fisheries. And just some of the things that we've noticed, that during the first year, there was about 20% of the crop anglers using it. By year 3, that was up to 70% of crop anglers on those reservoirs. So it's definitely grew in popularity. We also determined there was a kind of an obvious learning curve with it. During that first year, the catch rates or harvest rates for fish per hour were slightly higher, and by the time it was over, they were 2 to 3 times higher. So we think it may take a little while. It may be easier for younger folks to learn that technology, a little more tech savvy, but just some of the things that we've looking at here in Mississippi as far as its use and how many people are using it, and the catch rates and everything of different groups.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. And last but not least, Dave.
Hey, y'all. So I'm Dave Glover. I'm the Rivers and Streams Program Manager for the Division of Fisheries within the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So I assist with making regulations for recreational and commercial fishing throughout the state. So I've had some personal experience using forward-facing sonar while fishing. Unfortunately, on other people's boats, not mine. But I've really been amazed by the detail you're able to pick up, and of course, fascinated by observing fish behaviors. But I do think there's a lot of opportunity for anglers to learn a lot about the individual fish behaviors and to become better anglers. The division has had to field concerns from a handful of constituents regarding forward-facing sonar, particularly with respect to its potential to give an unfair advantage, or concerns regarding potential for overharvest. Some have expressed concerns over a potential increase in snagging for larger fish that might be of concern for conservation as well. So But in Illinois, we feel like we can continue to manage the state's fisheries resources with traditional harvest regulations. So your traditional creel length limits in response to changes in population characteristics that we collect from standardized surveys. So relative abundance, size distribution, body condition, those types of things. So basically, we believe that regulating the technology at this time is in Illinois is not necessary. In fact, many of the concerns that we've heard, such as snagging, are already illegal. So we definitely encourage the enforcement of our current regulations as opposed to creation of new or redundant laws.
Okay, thank you all. So I have a couple of questions for the panelists, and I'm not going to call on you each individually. I'll pose a question, and if you want to chime in, go ahead. But don't feel like, every panelist doesn't have to respond to every question, if that makes sense. So first of all, what additional research do you think is needed on live sonar? Go ahead, Dave.
So I do think that there's some really interesting things to think about in terms of potentials. One thing that I've thought about is the indirect effects. Clearly, we've pointed out it's a little easier to target larger individuals and things like that. And for a while, we've kind of, I guess, agreed that there's benefits to these larger individuals of the population. So the idea of big, old, fat, fecund female fish, the buffs of the populations, and there could be maternal influences to better up, higher quality offspring and things like that. So I think there's need to kind of keep an eye on this stuff and see whether there's a potential greater impact than we're giving it credit for right now. But I think in general, we have this idea of a relationship between harvest regulations that we currently have and the fishing mortality that equates to. So if there's any advance in fishing, we could see a change in that relationship. And so again, that's something that we need to continue to monitor and determine if we need to make creel limits or length limits, season limits a little stricter.
Thanks, Dave. Anybody else have thoughts on necessary research? Steve.
Yeah, I'll throw in the human dimension side of things. I refer to a number of different ways of doing studies and some research gaps, but the human dimension is a big one. So, what do anglers think about this, and what's their understanding, and making sure that we're not just asking the users. Because again, and I know that was a great example from Mississippi, where now 70% of the boat, I assume those are boat anglers. After a couple of years, we're using them, but I still think we're talking about a small percentage of the overall angling community, and we do need to consider them as as natural resource management agencies collectively work on behalf of all resource users. We just need to make sure that we have space for those. For all angling voices to be heard, especially as it relates to coming up with fisheries management objectives, which is where some of this might interface. How well does use of this technology align with our ability to achieve different fisheries management objectives?
Thanks, Steve. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say what Dr. Cooke added about that 70%. That again was just at our flood control reservoirs. So just 3 of the water bodies in our state and it was for crappie anglers. So, what we've seen just from some of the data that's coming in from our creel surveys across the state of different water bodies, it's more like 30 to 35%. So just comment on that.
Okay. I'm gonna move on to the next question. I think this will be my last one, just in the interest of seeing what kinds of questions are out there in the audience. So how can we as fishery professionals, so fishery researchers, fishery managers, and even just anglers, help balance the tensions between the opportunities and the challenges posed by this technology? Getting philosophical here, so.
I'll jump in on that one. As I mentioned, the demographics of our angling community is changing as the baby boomer population ages out of the sport, and younger new anglers come in that are more tech savvy and have grown up with technology all of their lives. And I think from an agency standpoint, you have this conundrum of, well, we certainly want to protect the resource because that's what the whole sport is based on. But on the other hand, we want to recruit anglers and make sure that we've got people coming into the sport because that's what pays the bills. And so there's going to have to be some sort of a balance. As I mentioned, I think if you ask the question right now, and let's say 50-50 that are for facing sonar versus against, ask that same question of your angling public in 10 years, and I think it will probably be a different answer. And to be realistic, the technology is not going away. And the industry that's supporting it is making advancements every day. The technology that is out there right now is almost in its infancy in some respects compared to what is being used in the military. And that's where a lot of this technology has come from, is military technology, and it's gradually working its way into the civilian field and into fisheries. There's live sonar in saltwater applications that can see fish a mile away. And so that same sort of technology is going to gravitate its way into freshwater systems at some point. And you know, to Jerry's point, or Dave's point, the idea of regulations and creel and bag limits seem to be the most logical way to try to manage this rather than trying to do something to actually limit the technology. Because I think at some point you wind up with some real issues about, you know, if you say, well, you can't use it for this species or that species, then enforcement at the state level becomes a real challenge too. So there's so many different questions and things that have to be considered when, from an agency standpoint, certainly trying to do resource management.
Thanks, Gene. Other thoughts on how we can sort of balance the challenges and opportunities here, Jerry?
Well, as this has become more popular, of course, we hear it, and as I'm sure a lot of state agencies do, you have to remember those that are using it like it, and those that do not may not, or have different feelings. And for us, the best way I can find to kind of answer those questions from the public or concerned anglers is we will continue to do our job. And our job as fisheries managers and our staff out in the field is continuous sampling. And it's not just sampling one time, it is monitoring trends over time is always important. So looking at fish population and changes that occur. So, we try not to have a knee-jerk reaction, if you will, when it comes to things like that. And again, we did change some regulations, but at those reservoirs, but there were other factors other than just higher harvest rates. There was more pressure. There was a poor year class strength, and different things that went into it, not just that one thing. So for us, I think it's just important to continue doing what we do. And to learn more about it as we can. But there's always going to be some that when new things come in, because if you remember back years ago when SciScan first came out, there was things about that or different when you could put GPS coordinates on there. So everything changes and we just kind of have to adapt with it.
Thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, I'll be really brief.
Yep, go ahead.
So for me, I mean, this is just one issue that comes across our desks, of what anglers are concerned about in the public. And so this is just one of many. So I feel like this is a golden opportunity for us to provide the public with information on how we're trying to use an evidence-based approach to regulate fisheries. And that's how we approach, everything of all the concerns. And so really we prefer not to lead with regulation just based on fears or concerns, but with actual evidence. There's certain circumstances where that we might change that, but I think in general I think it's a good opportunity for us to highlight that we are doing our jobs and explain what that is.
Yeah, great point, Dave. And these webinars are sponsored by the Science Transfer Program, which seeks to provide fishery managers with scientific information in formats that are more useful for them to do their jobs, but also to talk to their constituents. So certainly if there's ideas for products or formats of information that would be helpful for talking to your constituents, I'd be super interested to hear. Gene.
Just a quick follow-up on his comment there, and to Dr. Cooke's point about the need for additional research. There is so much misinformation on social media out there right now about how live sonar is destroying fish populations of various species all across the country. And once it gets shared 3 or 4 times on Facebook, it must be true. And there's so little research out there and so little information coming from credible sources to counteract that right now. And so you wind up with this very strong division among anglers that embrace the technology and those people that feel that fishing should be a certain way. And their reasoning is it should be this way because it's ruining the fishery. And we really don't have any information to back that up one way or the other.
Thanks. So I'd like to give the audience some time. So feel free to drop questions for our panelists in the chat or raise your hand. Again, you can click on the react button down at the bottom, and then there's a raise hand button there. Happy to call on folks or read questions from the chat if there's anything.
Well, folks are throwing questions in there. Maybe I'll just follow up on what Gene said. And, we always think about when there's conflict, we think about there being conflict between the recreational fishing sector and some external entity. We are really, really diverse. And we fish for all sorts of reasons using different gear and have, different values and ethics and all of these things. There's a ton of conflict and disagreement and heterogeneity within the recreational fishing sector. I think what Gene described was just that. There are, I like to fish this way, therefore that's the right way, right? And of course, social media provides that platform for these perspectives to be shared really quite widely.
Thanks. Somebody is sharing their whiteboard. You could stop that share, that'd be great. Oh, Steve, is that you? No.
It is not.
Gabrielle Creener. Okay, stop sharing. All right, there's a question in the chat. Do you know what states all currently have ongoing forward-facing sonar research? Anybody have any ideas on that?
There's
the last.
Go ahead.
Well, the last time that at one of the Southern Division American Fisheries Society's conferences, we got to talking about this. It's obviously been a hot topic, and there are a number of states that are doing just exactly what Mississippi was doing and what Texas has done, where they're adding questions onto existing creel surveys. But so far, that is about as far as I've heard of anything going on other than what was done. I saw Justine in the comments up there. You know, I'm not sure in Wisconsin or maybe somebody in Minnesota. I know they've done a little bit of work of looking at using live sonar in terms of some ice fishing issues, but it's pretty limited as far as I know right now.
Thanks, Gene. Has there been any retrospective research on how other technological advancements impact fisheries, even just the basic fish finder, or any personal reflections on different techs throughout the years? Carrie has stumped the panel. Dave.
I'd be interested in seeing some of that actually. None that I know of, but something like the Alabama rig or the umbrella rig, whatever. And I mean, there was a huge debate over how it was going to destroy fisheries, and to see whether there was any follow up on that.
Thanks. All right, I've got one more question in the chat, and then I'll go to Colin Lake, who has his hand up. What do the speakers think about a precautionary approach by providing each population with a refuge or sanctuary, or some portion of the population is exempted from all angling related issues? That seems like a tough sell.
I'm pretty close to Dave and Dave and I did my PhD with Dave. I believe there should be a portion of whether it be water bodies or wilderness that is that safety net, if you will. That's my personal thinking, and the research we've done seems to support the evidence around that. But that's an access issue, and whenever you start to limit access to resources, to spaces, to waters, it tends to get folks up in arms. So,
thanks. Colin Lake. Oh, Jerry, did you want to say something quick?
I was just going to say, like Dr. Cooke, it would be an access. Another things that we consider is just the enforcement issue of it. There's a lot of things that you could put on the table that would be very hard to enforce as well, but not less just taking away public water from all anglers.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead, Colin.
Hi, can you hear us? It's actually Steve McNevin.
Oh, yes, I can.
Okay. Yeah, just sitting with Colin here. We had some computer issues, so sorry our video's not working either. Just a comment. I like Gene's comment around, and sorry, I'm a lake manager on Lake Ontario, acting lake manager, but Gene made a good comment around recruiting new anglers, and they've grown up with technology and that whole point around that too. And I think what we see with a lot of our new anglers too is a generational shift in a lot of them are very conservation oriented as well, and catch and release oriented. And I think a thing that we can think about when we think about research is doing a lot of research to be proactive around the developing best practices, not necessarily regulations, but education around best practices to using this technology. I think Stephen Cooke mentioned, finding those fish in locations where they were usually sanctuaries for fish, and access to those fish at depths on barotrauma and things like that. So best practices around catch and release and using this technology to, get those fish and the best practices around how we can also, just really around catch and release and stuff, I guess is what I'm getting at. And that's some proactive research around the use of the technology. And I think this generation with using, social media and stuff, if they can feed upon some of that, they really get it out there, right? And they drive that forward themselves around, within the fishing community, right? So anyways, just a comment there around some research that could be proactive and help get in front of this and educate people on the use and best practices in catch and release.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Lots of action in the chat, so check that out because I don't have time to read through them all. But I'm going to pause the recording. Thanks. Okay, so it is 3 o'clock. Unfortunately, I'd like to wrap up to just be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much to our panelists and Steve, our speaker. Big round of applause. Appreciate your time and your insights. Yeah, I wish we had another half an hour for this conversation, but thanks everyone for being here. Make sure you sign up for the next one, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thanks.